Hi, good evening, everyone, and I hope we uh, have a very fruitful discussion, academic discussion out of the thing. And today's topic would be a little tricky, but very important for the upcoming days because we have now more choices in immunomodulation, which I think is the mainstay for the treatment of corona. So our topic of discussion today is multimodal immunomodulatory multimodal approach in immunomodulation of COVID. What is our perception? What are the evidences? And what are the experiences on a personal basis, as well as why we are treating patients? So for today's discussion, we have Dr. Suresh Ramsubban, who is also a very good friend and one of the best critical care experts in, I would say, all over the world, right? And he had been a good friend all through. He is the chief consultant and critical care specialist as well as pulmonologist in Apollo Hospitals, Kolkata. We have Dr. Vijay Mishra, who is director critical care medical hospital Ranchi. I think Dr. Vijay is also the medical director of the entire hospital itself. We have Dr. Apurva Kumar Bora, who is the head of the department of both critical care and emergency medicine, Narayan Super Speciality Hospital, Guwahati. We have another friend from Guwahati, Dr. Rakesh Periwal, who is the head of intensive care in Apollo Hospitals, Guwahati. We have Dr. Prashant Ranjan Behera, who had been very close to me all through. He's a consultant critical care medicine uh, and as well as emergency of Tata Steel Medical Hospital, Kalinganagar. We have Dr. Sudhir Patnaik, physician and diabetologist, Utkal Hospital, Odisha. We have Dr. Prashant Kumar, senior consultant and director, Department of Respiratory Critical Care and Sleep Medicine, IQCT Medical College and Hospital, Durgapur. And last but not the least, we have Dr. Sayan Gupta, Chief Medical Coordinator and ICU in charge, North City Hospital, Kolkata itself. So to start, I would heavily fall back on Suresh for multiple things. And maybe if you allow me so, I have some supporting slides to make it easier for the viewers if all the panelists do agree, because normally the moderator is never liked because he talks the most and he doesn't bother to answer but always put up the questions. Okay, so I would uh, start with Suresh to give a very quick outline of management. So what would be an ideal management of a moderate to severe COVID patients? And we not going into the details of it. So what would be the mainstay of the management in a moderate to severe COVID?
Thanks, Arunam. Thanks very much for the kind words. I don't think I deserve that many kind words. Um, anyway, so I think thanks all the people who have joined in this webinar. And I think the question that has been put is very simple. How do we manage moderate to severe COVID? And that's where the most of the management happens, because once you get critically ill with COVID, you do best supportive care. So I think the best option is to manage the moderate to severe COVID illness. So I think in that situation, there has been no doubt that initially if you are depends on again on the duration of illness and the duration of symptoms. So if you are in the first 3 days of illness and you're sick enough, nowadays obviously with even with moderate illness or no illness, with your high risk, and you have the antibodies cocktail that is available, is one of the options, especially if you're at risk. So I won't say you're at moderate to high disease, you're at risk for a moderate to severe disease, you get that. But if you've already developed disease, which will generally means that mostly you're in the second week of illness, because the first week is a flu-like illness, and in the second week that you actually start getting into a respiratory distress and other medical problems which may relate to cytokine storms and may be related to blood pressure and issues like renal failure and so on. So in that situation, the question is, does remdesivir work? So one is antivirals. Is there any role for antivirals? The antivirals are now coming off it, so there's really no role for any of the but we still at high risk patient who in the 7th to 10th day window maybe still continuing to use remdesivir. But if you're critically ill, already ventilated, more than 10 days into the illness, we are not doing any antiviral therapy. Second comes, so then the only thing is that if you're requiring oxygen or if your saturation is at rest less than 94% or with exertion less than 94%, we would give you corticosteroids, and that would be dexamethasone 8 milligram. 6 milligram is the recommended, but in India, so we give 8 milligram of dexamethasone as treatment. So these are the only two approved therapies. So in case you are on dexamethasone and you continue to require oxygen, that means you're on a non-rebreather mask or on HFNO or on you get onto a BiPAP, then you need to go get onto an immunomodulator, which would be a tocilizumab most likely, because that's the most easily available drug as far as this thing is concerned. And that is one which we use most commonly. The others, I'm not very sure that bevacizumab and others are equivalent, but there are, I think that will be the point of discussion. And I think many of the speakers, panelists will be giving their experience about the other things. In patients in whom we cannot use large amount of dexamethasone for whatever reason, say you're in DKA already when you present, or you are this thing, so then we use the baricitinib as a DEXA sparing agent, or in the patients in whom we wanted to 1 milligram or DEXA ARDS dose or a solriamfetol 2 milligram, and because of the uncontrolled hyperglycemia or problems with dexamethasone, we use a combination of dexamethasone and baricitinib for orally 4 milligram for 14 days. So this is the three things that are available to us easily. Plasma is out, antibody therapy, and all these things are meant for people who are at risk, not for people who are on this thing. Management of, once you get into ARDS, it is best supportive care. HFNC is better than those debates are not the point of discussion today. So I think I've probably answered to use dexamethasone, baricitinib, remdesivir, tocilizumab. And I think we can go through everybody's experience and say
yes,
what
I would
they
definitely go that. Maybe Suresh, you would add anticoagulation, right?
Yes, anticoagulation is part of general critical care, because nowadays we say it's low molecular weight heparin at therapeutic and not a prophylactic dose. Some people will do intermediate dose, but majority of the critical care societies now suggest only prophylactic dose, not to use therapeutic dose unless there is proof of with the thrombosis, actual VT, because immunothrombosis is slightly different than actual thrombosis. And maybe the D-dimer is high because of immunotherapy. It puts you at high risk if your D-dimer is more than 10,000.
Your take is that if you can do a proper immunomodulation management, you may not be heavily relying on the anticoagulation, not at least the therapeutic dosage.
Correct. Yeah. Therapeutic anticoagulation, maybe in the first couple of days, it's not going to be this thing. So if somebody deteriorates despite appropriate treatment and radiologically not worsening, but oxygenation worsening, then I might go to a therapeutic because the patient is too sick to get a CTPA. Then I'll say, let's commit him to therapeutic anticoagulation. But the initial thing would be, the other thing as a trade-off is if the D-dimer is very high, we do intermediate dosing. That means instead of doing 1 milligram per kilogram twice daily of low molecular, I'll do 1 milligram kilogram once daily. So it is neither therapeutic nor prophylactic. It's called an intermediate dosing. So that is one option that is available for management.
Fair enough. I will go to Dr.
Euvolemic status to negative.
I will take Dr. Vijay Mishra's opinion. Welcome, Dr. Mishra. I will take your opinion and then go to others. Anything to add on or subtract? Anything you beg to differ?
Well, not really anything to differ, but just adding further on what Suresh said about intermediate dosing. I kind of, we practiced initially the therapeutic dosing in all the patients, or rather even today, we are practicing therapeutic dosing in patients whom we find it really difficult to oxygenate. I think their oxygenation levels are very poor despite the best of the efforts. And obviously CTPA is not an option for such critically ill patients.
And many of the time CTPAs come negative actually, because either it is subsegmental or a microvascular thrombosis.
Yeah, but people being on so much of high oxygen requirements, shifting them from one floor to another floor is a real challenge. So that's the only area where we have gone into therapeutics.
And any point on the immunomodulation? What Suresh said you want to add?
Yeah, exactly. Apart from DEXA, the things that we have used otherwise, is tocilizumab, what Suresh mentioned. But we've also were forced to use, I would say forced to use to begin with some immunomodulators like, thymosin alpha, which we were not really, when you're in a desperate situation and you don't want your patients progressing down that line. So that is one thing we have used on patients who are moderate and moving on to severe
Severe
forms
disease.
of, severe disease.
And okay, so we'll come to that, the different options, and also our point of discussion would be whether we can combine certain immunomodulators to get the optimal effect. I will come to first Apurva and then Rakesh. Apurva. Kindly unmute. Apurva, you have to unmute.
Okay, I was just listening. But one real problem in Guwahati is we don't get tocilizumab, itolizumab, nothing, and so we have to think for alternative option. So this is not available even till now. So tocilizumab, one is cost; it's very costly. And in my experience with tocilizumab is very bad actually. I would rather say it is actually very bad experience. Maybe it is in guidelines it is mentioned. I don't think it actually works. Number one point in the dose they have mentioned. And second is I don't have enough experience to say more clearly because there is very lack of tocilizumab. Rather I have very good experience with plasma actually. Unfortunately, it was actually
It fell into disgrace. Yeah. Okay, we'll come to that. So, on your opinion, that your experience on tocilizumab is either sparse or not so good, you favor plasma, and rest of the points you do agree that the timing of steroids, timing of remdesivir, or you have certain other.
One point I have to make here:
Yes.
timing of steroid. I think this is the point that makes everything, the difference in outcome. When actually you start steroid, it should not be early, should not be late. So my point, I heavily relied on CT scan. To be in my practice, I used to do CT scan in each and every patient. The moment there is ground glassiness, I'll go for steroid. And I have very good experience with
So it's not about the requirement of oxygenation or fall in saturation. Whenever you are suspecting, you are taking a CT scan and then and if there are ground GGOs.
And that is indirect evidence that if patient is desaturating, definitely the lung is getting involved. So,
but you must have some methods to identify that which patient at what point of time should get the CT scan, because if it is done early, it is a waste of resource.
That is a very important question. Actually, it's not that straight. It's not very clear to answer because see, if you do CT routinely to all patients, sometimes initial period there will be no CT change. It will occur around 5-6 days after.
So how do you go? Do you go by the symptom or go by the day of illness?
To be very frank, I go by the day without symptom, because see the history is so absurd. You cannot take proper history. Sometimes patient will.
People normally, I agree with you. The people normally do not remember the onset of illness itself.
Actually, that is why I go by date. I do not go by the symptom.
Fair enough. I will come back very quickly. I will go very quickly to Rakesh and then our panelist. Rakesh.
Yeah, baricitinib is something we started using last 2 weeks. I don't know why Dr. Suresh doesn't want it with steroids. Fairly cheap, use first up, not much of contraindication. I think there is enough mortality data. I don't know, but fairly anybody on more than 10 liters of oxygen, we are using with steroids from day one, but that practice is only maybe 2 weeks old now. And tocilizumab very little, but first day, beyond 24 hours, no tocilizumab. We are able to procure somehow.
The first day of what?
Mortality is first day of presentation. It is really desaturating in front of you. I don't know what you do about patients who come to you with normal oxygen, then require nasal oxygen, then require higher oxygen. Are they anywhere in the timing for immunomodulation, especially with something like tocilizumab? I don't know about that. So
Okay,
it's
we'll
only somebody
discuss
who's a
that part.
stormy course.
I think you have
that it happened
come
all
up
in
with a
front of
nice
you.
question. You have come up with a nice question. Let me frame it easier for you. That
Because this is the first time, this is the first time, Arindam, we are seeing patients who come with normal oxygen. They desaturate in front of you. They are still requiring 2-3 liters. You don't know if you should modulate then, but I think that's the time to modulate. Why wait for 10 liters, 15 liters of oxygen and then try to do something?
exactly.
I think timing of
That is a
immunomodulation
very
is very, very difficult.
tricky
And
question
baricitinib
that
still
we will.
not using in nasal oxygen, but yeah, on anybody requiring 10 liters of oxygen, day 1, day 2, starting baricitinib, we have given it all patients day 1, maybe 8 to 9 patients till now. I don't know, but that's what we are doing of late. And maybe using a little bit of higher steroid day 1, day 2. I don't know what would be the high dose, but maybe 125 equivalent.
Okay, so we'll try to,
sometimes we use.
Rakesh, we'll try to answer most of these questions because you have put up all the controversial questions in a rapid fire mode, right? The dosage of steroid, the timing of and how to manage a patient who is deteriorating despite therapy, adequate therapy, so-called quote unquote adequate therapy, and just in front of you. We'll come back to that. I will come to Dr. Prashant Kumar and then Prashant Behera. First, Prashant Kumar. We have two Prashants sitting side by side, almost on an identical dress, red color. Dr. Prashant Kumar. I think you have to unmute. Dr. Prashant?
Yeah, I've already unmuted.
Yes.
I hope you can hear.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah, so thing is that immunomodulation, right? So steroid has saved the maximum.
Am I audible or what?
I think he lost contact.
I think Dr. Behera, you can continue. I will come back to Prashant once he joins back. Dr. Behera, unmute yourself.
Hello?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, sir. So actually, in maximum, I prefer to hit early and hit hard, because when any patient is going to severe condition, many of the drugs are not working. So when patient saturation is falling below 94, 6-minute walk test, saturation falling below 4% in comparison to last reading, then I am starting steroid. Then about enoxaparin, I am using prophylactic dose. If D-dimer is very high, then I am using therapeutic dose. And about baricitinib and tofacitinib, in last 2 weeks back, we have started using. Maybe some patients are coming out, some patients are not coming.
So you are not sure about
really.
It's too early to say if you're using. We will see the evidences and come back. Dr. Shayan Gupta.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
My experience with the immunomodulatory drugs, I have been using this remdesivir and steroids after a certain period of time. What we have found out is supposedly if the patient has actually started showing signs of worsening hypoxemia, then if we actually go for this tocilizumab within 48 hours, my experience is I found a good response, but in certain group of patients, in certain subset of patients, that the good response remains transient. And again, the patient shows signs of deterioration in terms of the saturation. Hello?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah. So if we actually take a sample size of 10 patients, so my voting would be for tocilizumab, because 6 out of 10 patients, they do show signs of good response to this worsening hypoxemia. But my point is, it should be started at a very optimum time within 48 hours of worsening hypoxemia once we rule out the sepsis by doing certain septic parameters like inflammatory markers like procalcitonin and all these things. So my voting would be for tocilizumab. As regards other immunomodulatory drugs, I personally do not have a first-hand experience like Gatinib and others.
Okay, so so more or less you agree, but your vote goes towards the interleukin-6 receptor blocker tocilizumab. So if
Exactly.
both the senior people like Suresh and Vijay Mishra ji allow me, I will take only 2 minutes time to come up with a so that a little better understanding and discussion do happen. So I'm sharing the screen, right? And if you see so that this is the more or less the what they have called the 4 horsemen in the COVID immunopathology, right? So be it the initial, the viral replication and evading the basic the immune responses based on interferons and then interacting with ACE2 inhibitors and all others. Then towards the yellow circle is that what it causes to the endothelium and all others. The orange circle is that the mostly the cytokines, and this is the complex interaction of the alveolus and the endothelium itself, which eventually leads to diffuse alveolar damage, acute lung injury, ARDS, and end organ damage. So everything goes haywire right from your endothelial epithelial functions. I'm not going into the details. And this is how it looks like, a very complex situation where right from your TNF alpha to different interleukins to your nets, your other chemokines and cytokines, VGEF, endothelial cells, pneumocytes, everything goes haywire. It's such a complex process that it would require a lot of understanding of immunology to appreciate that what goes on. But being a clinician, we are more focused towards the clinical symptoms, but we fail to appreciate that what goes wrong in the cellular and subcellular level and what the complex interaction happens, which eventually ends up into diffuse alveolar damage and microvascular thrombosis, which causes all this hypoxia and hypercapnia and persistent refractory respiratory failure in COVID itself, which looks like this: a thrombus, edema, and eventual fibrosis. And these are the targets, right, from your targets of therapeutic targets, right, from your entry of the virus within the cell or getting it out by exocytosis, or in different your targets of the viral itself. But if we can summarize that, we can target the spike protein itself, like vaccines and others, or the whole virus itself, which is an inactivated vaccine or the convalescent plasma does, or now the new one, the neutralizing antibodies, which we'll discuss. Maybe we can do the main proteases or RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. So in the different sort of antivirals or the zinc supplementation. But our area of interest is this one, where we are actually looking into, if you say so, that how the immunomodulation can actually work. So what happens is that when one of the prime cytokine is interleukin-6, released by the inflammatory process, pro-inflammatory process, which predominantly releases out of many cytokines, the predominant release is interleukin-6, right? And this is where the interleukin-6 comes and attaches to the alveolar cell membrane-based receptors or any other cell membrane-based receptors. And there are 2 types of interleukin-6 receptors. One is a fixed on the cell membrane, and one is a soluble receptors, which are transcribed when there is a very strong pro-inflammatory signals. And interleukin-6 attaches both to the membrane-based as well as the soluble receptors, which then the soluble receptors internalize within the membrane and so it's an additional mechanism where the pro-inflammation is accentuated. Once it attaches here, right, then it transduces its signal to the JAK through the JAK-STAT mechanism. So first stage is JAK, which is a tyrosine kinase membrane sort of thing, which initiates the STAT, and then STAT goes into the nucleus and the nuclear and within the DNA, and eventually the transcription of feedback in or transcription of the target gene happens, and side by side there is a transcription of feedback inhibitors. So it becomes a self-sustaining, self-restraining feedback system through the SOX. The SOX, what we call, is your signal transduction and activators of transcriptions. So that goes back and inhibits the JAK itself, right? So these are the areas where our target of immunomodulation can happen. Steroid is overall immune suppression, irrespective of whether it is a pro or anti-inflammatory. Interleukin-6 inhibitors can directly inhibit the interleukin-6 function, or it can block the interleukin-6 receptors like tocilizumab. We have the JAK inhibitors in form of baricitinib or tofacitinib. We have JAK-STAT inhibitors, which could be specific or non-specific. And then we have SOX mimems. So this is how it looks like, the different the JAK inhibitors or the JAK-STAT inhibitors, and which could be specific or non-specific, right? And this is how the baricitinib additionally works in the endocytosis and preventing the endocytosis of the virus itself. And this is how the different actions, including the thalidomide, the tocilizumab, the hydroxychloroquine, the baricitinib, they work in tandem to reduce the overall the inflammatory process, right? And these are a lot of the trials that are going both on the tofacitinib and baricitinib, and as of now it works well. And to answer a certain question of the timing of particularly the tocilizumab, this I think is one of the windows where your inflammation is on its peak, as well as the viral replication to some extent is somewhere in between, and also your functional reserve has started to go down. That's the best window to use the immunomodulators. And if you see, these are all the studies which have utilized the immunomodulators, mostly the tocilizumab, the timing which has given the best results is. So just maybe at the beginning, not at the end. So if you are using at the end, you maybe end up losing the patient and blaming the immunomodulator itself, right? So I will come back to Suresh to give some certain comments, because I tried to simplify it, but I would need your help to sort of elaborate the very complex thing. Yes, Dr. Suresh.
I think a brilliant set of slides. I think you went a little fast for a lot of people, but I think it summarizes both the epithelial, endothelial, and immune and the immune damage that is happening along with it. So I think it's very clear that we realize that it's the day 7 to day 14 of illness when you have the maximum inflammation and the viral replication is coming down. So it is the targeting of viral replication happens in the first 7 days. Ideally, of course, we cannot distinguish that. So this is where the issue is. So I think that's why the tocilizumab criteria is.
I will now ask you a direct
let me answer
question,
a few things. One was what Rakesh asked me. Why do I know?
Suresh, I will ask you a direct question before going to the immunomodulation. So in the first week, you said that the preventing the viral replication would be the top priority. So in that phase, are you using both the antibody cocktail and antivirals together in a high risk patient, or you are using one of them? Did I get to you, Dr. Suresh?
I didn't get. So yes, for a high risk patient, that is anybody who has got risk factor for severe disease, the antibody in the first. Yeah. No, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Little interjected.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I think. Yeah. The question was, would I use what is the best thing to use in the first few days of illness for a high risk patient, isn't it? So theoretically,
Yes.
a monoclonal antibody or a very high titer plasma would be the best thing. A high titer plasma where you have known antibody, unfortunately, we cannot do that. A high titer plasma is a natural antibody, while monoclonal antibodies are
Right.
prepared antibodies. So these would be the best things. Obviously, interferons would be because you're trying to escape the interferon mechanism. So some kind of interferon therapy may be useful, and that the data isn't out as of now. So right now, the data which is out is for the antibody cocktail. And that is the one that we are, that is why we tend to use that for high risk patients. How do you define high risk? Is the standard set of high risk that is age about 65, multiple comorbidities, immunosuppressed, so on and so forth.
Now, maybe would you consider the combination therapy of an antiviral, interferon, and antibody cocktail? Will that be also working?
Yeah, I think so. I think it will work. Theoretically speaking, yes, because viral replication is happening. So the antibodies are whatever you're infusing, as whether it's a monoclonal antibody or as a plasma, preformed antibodies. What you're trying to do is these are antibodies against the spike protein. So you want to mostly prevent them from attaching it. So we want still the viral multiplication inside the cells to stop also, other mechanisms to act also. And so endocytosis has to be prevented, them to use our RNA, DNA machinery should be stopped. So I think it's a combination of antivirals. So there's no, so in any infectious diseases, I think the principle is never to treat with antibodies. The principle is obviously stop the bacterial or viral multiplication.
Yes.
So I think it has to.
I think you made a very clear and strong point, my friend, that it's not to prevent its effect. It's the primary strategy should be to eliminate the virus per se, right? So to prevent its replication. Dr. Mishra, any quick comment on the viral replications, prevention of viral replication strategy? Because Suresh added one good thing is that if you are trying to evade the interferon, so whether interferon, giving an interferon in the initial phase would be helpful.
No, personally speaking, I have no experience with interferon. Neither are there enough data or literatures to support. But yes, theoretically, they can prevent your further viral replication. But one thing I kind of want to point about the monoclonal antibodies.
Yes, please.
We are using it to prevent further, basically preventing the binding of the viral protein to the cell surface in high-risk patients.
Right.
Now, not every high-risk patient who gets a COVID infection will convert into a disease, right? Or a severe disease or a moderate disease. Right? So does it, kind of, should it be a regular thing to do to use this monoclonal antibody in every patient who's got a COVID infection, hasn't started, has just got the mild form of the disease or no disease at all? Does it make...
I would ask Suresh to answer this, and then I will put my comment too.
No, I agree with you, because it is just not possible to treat every asymptomatic patients. So the time frame, that's why it's 7 days. It's that many people, if you have a flu-like illness, the general rule is within 3 to 5 days, you should be all right, or you should start getting better. So if by 5th day, if you're not getting better and you're high risk, I would be like Trump. I would take my chances and take it rather than to say later, oh shit, I should have given it. So this is always a judgment call. You're sitting on a, splitting a hair. So it is obviously there's no right answer to this question. Yes, can we afford to give every Tom, Dick and Harry who's above 65 who has got risk factor on the first day itself? And the answer is no, there might be other side effects which we right now don't know. So I agree with you, Dr. Mishra. I think it is a little bit of prudent sitting. So I don't think any of us would give, unless you are Donald Trump, that on the first day of illness itself will be there.
So we're basically talking about when you will be about to enter into, the moderate form of the disease. That's when you would be thinking of.
Now, I think I would summarize.
But you don't want the disease to have actually started causing. You don't want to start it once you have started oxygen, because then it doesn't work. We know that.
Yeah, before oxygen. Yeah. Arindam, you want to say something?
Yes. We calculated according to the major trials that happened for this REGEN-COV, Casirivimab and Remdesivir. The number needed to treat came out to be close to 40. That means if you treat 40 people, so that means of almost 24 lakhs of expenses, then actually you are preventing one severe disease to happen. But the million-dollar question to predict that which of the person would have a severe disease. So to answer that correctly is that you take a chance and you try to protect the most vulnerable patient or the most valuable patient, like Donald Trump, right? So in India, it is working more of a either a VIP or a very sick sort of thing. But I would very, very agree with Dr. Suresh is that maybe where there is a non-resolution of symptoms in the 96 hours and where there is a little premonition that this patient is going towards a sort of non-resolving disease, I think in that 4th, 5th day, it would be the ideal time. Because if it is too late, I think it won't work. But if it is too early, it would be a non or an improper resource utilization. So somewhere in between, we have, that's the clinical prudence that we have to learn by mistakes, experience, and sometimes by the gathering, acquiring knowledge.
Availability and the cost involved, it makes it even more prudent on us to make that wise.
Yes, yes. That's why I call that resource. Yes, Dr. Prashant. Sorry, we missed you that during it.
Right. Sorry, I had a power cut here. So the thing is that what is high risk now? This time we saw lots of young patients going into complications and patients very advanced age with very poor lung functions, lots of comorbidities going home very well in a very short period of time. So this we cannot say that this person is high risk, hence he should be getting it. The second point is, are we creating new mutation with the introduction of these kind of cocktails? Are we creating? Are we going to create a more virulent virus if we expose them to these kind of cocktails?
I think Dr. Suresh, would you like to answer this?
Yeah, that's true for plasma also. So that's true for plasma. Any antibody that we give, it's a monoclonal or preformed from a cow or a serum or from whatever it is. So what you're doing is you are looking at a spike and you are making you are basically creating antibodies in the lab which are going to attach to the spike protein and prevent it from internalizing. So yes, you are creating a monster. It's very, very, very possible that the virus will find ways to detect and get away with it. And but that's true for any therapy which will prevent it from happening. So I don't think that should be a reason not to use it, because it is an appropriate idea, and I think it's been appropriately tested in a clinical science also.
Also,
and to add to it, to add to Dr. Suresh's comment about Prashant's questions as well as a comment, is that how to define who is at risk. So at risk is, if you can define, is your genetic or immune predisposition combined with the virulence of the virus. So as of now, we have not got evidence that the virus has a variable virulence. More or less, it's a name. It's our genetic predisposition or immune predisposition combined by our physiological reserve, which defines the higher risk. Some people have a less physiological reserve, but they're doing absolutely fine because they are not genetically predisposed to have a severe disease. Their immunity, some immune dysfunction which is yet to be discovered is there. So that's why even a healthy young adult is having the severe most disease, and an 80-year-old is going back home without any trouble. So unless we get that, till now we have to select patients who have got a lesser physiological reserve as a higher risk. Otherwise, you would be utilizing it to a huge population of healthy young adult is going to be very, very impractical.
And second is non-resolution of symptoms. So I have had patients who had fever on and off for 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks, just the fever. So is it non-resolution of symptoms that I start worrying about things and start bombarding him with whatever I knew of?
Dr. Suresh,
fever,
the boss.
All the complications of COVID, one of the complications which we tend to ignore is inflammatory complication. So that is the fifth complication. You have cardiac complication, renal complication, and obviously ARDS is the #1 complication in the second week of illness. So one of the complications in the second week of illness is persistent inflammation. So, and that is a complication by itself. So do we treat the inflammation? So in an adult with what, naproxen or with steroids? And the answer is depends again. So you probably in that situation, if it is not harming the patient, you don't do anything at all. So there is inflammation per se is a complication. Persistent inflammation is a complication. This can evolve into an MIS kind of a thing as you grow further. If it goes beyond 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and beyond up till 3 months. But this is one small subsegment of the various complications that we can see with COVID. That is persistent inflammation.
Okay. Any comment, or otherwise I would ask a question or any other comment. Dr. Mishra, you have to leave or something of that sort. So can you have a concluding remark? Because I came to know you have a very dire emergency.
There is something that I cannot really avoid. See, if I have to put my thing, yes, I agree with most of the things that Suresh has been talking about. Talking about what one part of Dr. Prashant's question, that will we be creating a variant or a mutation in the virus if you are using these monoclonal antibodies? So they are like, passive vaccination, right? Not what we call as active immunization and passive immunization. So we have been using passive immunization for things like tetanus and rabies and so many other things. So I do not think that
which is mostly for your post-exposure prophylaxis.
Yes, it's exactly post-exposure prophylaxis.
Yes.
So usse kuch nahi hoga. It's unlikely. It shouldn't. Coming to the rest part of the COVID and its management, and most of what we are discussing today about immune modulation. Yes, exactly. The most important thing, whatever immune modulation apart from steroid that we are using, I think it's the timing. The dose may differ from center to center. Probably the dose will not make, in fact, a slightly higher dose will not cause as much harm as not using them at the right time. So that timing of 7 to 10 days, when you are beginning to move from, from replication to inflammatory storm, that's the time that we must intervene. As somebody said, one of my colleagues, that we hit hard. That's the time we must hit hard. Rest, we have been doing things very standard way.
From the audience, I have a very interesting question, right? Anyone, Suresh is taking all the hit. So if someone wants to hit hard now, what would be the definition of cytokine storm? Are there any cutoff values for the biomarkers? How do we define? Is there any clear definition of cytokine storm?
Well, if you want to spare Suresh.
Yes. You may take up, you may the savior for Suresh. I will come back to him. He has to work hard for it. So please start, sir.
Cytokine storm should not only be read in context of the lab values, right? It must also be read in the context of the clinical changes. So a persisting fever or a bad cough, persisting fever, a malaise, weakness in association with an IL-6 of, let's say, mildly raised or moderately raised, and your other inflammatory markers of CRP, D-dimers being moderately high is a storm. But if you have a number which is high and you are totally asymptomatic, probably it's not a storm. It's just a raised inflammatory marker.
Rakesh,
and also when we rule out any other cause for this rise, maybe secondary infections.
Yeah, fair enough. Rakesh, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, Rakesh, do you think there is an analogy or some similarity like the sepsis, where you cannot define it's more of a syndrome or a constellation of symptoms, something of that sort?
But I think COVID is more defined because we have a serological test. So we know the organism.
No, I'm talking about cytokine storm.
Cytokine storm is something which has been overrated because we wanted to buy an idea in the first wave of COVID. What would you call a person whose hypoxia worsens? That's a cytokine storm, who is requiring 2 liters to 4 liters to 6 liters and then going up. Personally, I don't look at IL-6 at all. So like it's out of there. We look at the CRP levels, but we don't know if the CRP goes up and the patient is okay. What should you do the next day? We turnaround times of maybe 48 hours for a test to see differences. I don't know when to time. When you say the window should also be of 24 to 48 hours. So what if someone is a baseline CRP of 70, 80, and his saturation is 96? What do you offer him? where as per the guidelines, nothing. Because we have taken only oxygen as a criteria for defining everything. Even if they have a city lesion, we don't move on to give the antivirals. I don't know if that approach has to change, because there is new data coming. We're doing scans on patients. The risk assessment, as they said, the antibody cocktail, I just have to ask Dr. Arindam, is it like a poor man's guideline is different or rich man's guideline is different? Is that what you want to say? Or you are not convinced by the evidence that this should be offered? I think if the cocktail is there and is approved, it has to be offered to everybody who is at risk. You don't know. I lost a patient whom I had offered the cocktail, CKD, but a saturation sitting on 98 for 3 days. He did not have a partner for the cocktail, and I could not give the 1200 milligram dose. I should have given.
For your information, Dr. Rakesh, you can keep it under the preservation with the standard preservation with your airtight container for 72 hours actually. So for a partner, you can wait for 72 hours.
2 hours. But who should pay the bill if the partner doesn't come? You should.
That's a very good question.
I mean, and that patient, we sat on it. I offered it to the family. They took it. They didn't find the partner. And the 4th day, he starts desaturating. And he's CKD. So no immunomodulation is an offer.
Then you feel bad actually.
Except thymosin, I think nobody's talking about thymosin. I just wanted to hear, because if you have CKD and CLD, I think that's the only agent you can offer, as whatever immunomodulation it does. I don't know about the data.
I will come back
people
to that.
Have used that.
Right. We have in agenda that thymosin alpha about it, because a lot of it. But I will come back to the question that is there any way that we can define cytokine storm, and what is the analogy of cytokine storm to the sepsis? Is it a more of a constellation of symptoms? Yeah, Dr. Suresh, your quick remark, then I will come back to Apurva.
Yeah, cytokine storm, I think, is a misnomer, as we all now know that the cytokine levels in a CRS, in a classical CRS, is more than 10,000 IL-6. In an ARDS in sepsis, the 600 to 700 range. We normally misnomer. So I think the complications of COVID or following the viral flu-like illness, what you're seeing is an ARDS, a shock that happens, maybe vasodilatation because of excess cytokine or an endothelial leakage that is happening, so endothelial dysfunction that is happening. So now we have a as Arindam showed very beautifully, that the mechanism of all the things, it's an it's a diffuse alveolar damage. By diffuse alveolar damage, we mean that all the parts of the alveolar capillary membrane are damaged, and as a result of it, an endothelium expresses as much ACE receptor as other side. So you get all these symptoms. So I think we should move away from that fact, but the fact that there is inflammatory things going on, which is marked by CRP, ferritin, and a coagulation, hypercoagulation going on marked by fibrin degradation products, to tell you that inflammation is going on. How to use it is obviously, we really don't know the answer. Cytokine storm is not a correct term.
And so you are discarding the term, and as you are saying that there could not be any cutoff value, right? Because cutoff value of any of the biomarkers. It's more of the trend, the clinical signs and symptoms, as well as the rapidity of the progression of the disease, which will indicate the patient is in little trouble. Dr. Apurva, you had been quiet for a while, so your take.
Quite interesting question actually. See, if you compare cytokine that subsisting with viral cytokine storm. What my feeling is, my opinion is that in viral, this COVID-19 cytokine storm, it starts with cytokine storm. Now this is a point where patients start deteriorating. Now, how will you define it? That's a very important question. How you define it? Is it saturation? Is it something else? Is it biomarkers? What is it actually? So it's very difficult to define. But in my practice, what I have seen, the most important biomarker is ferritin actually. That is invariably high in all patients. In my experience, I have seen around, I think around 350 patients. All patients with initial high ferritin used to deteriorate. That is my experience. I'm not doing any study or anything. This is just my observation. That
Both the Prashant, do you agree? Prashant Kumar and Prashant Behera with Apurva's say that the ferritin
all
could be a
these,
very important biomarker.
all these markers should be used with caution because they have to be processed very carefully in right time. For example, IL-6, we cannot depend on the numbers blindly because a very high IL-6 patient must be kicking football at his place.
okay.
So all these parameters, yes, ferritin, like Dr. Apurva said, yes, it's very sensitive. It is invariably high in patients who are sick, but IL-6 and all, I'll still say please use caution while interpreting it because you never know how it is being processed and whether it has been followed properly or not. Because these CRP is very reasonably a good marker to prognosticate things. But then again, this time CRP has not been matching with the clinical outcome again.
Absolutely.
Does the
That is
panel
what my
thinks that
observation.
does the panel think that CRP and ferritin, and particularly the trend of it, would be much better give a much better reflection of the disease process than the IL-6 because it could be variable due to the different assays or any other different confounding factors. Dr. Suresh, your take, then I will come to Prashant Behera.
I think you're right. It's just using one I think it's a clinical plus using a biomarker. Simple one CRP should also suffice. To be honest with you, but yes, inflammatory cocktail. So all pro-inflammatory state, ferritin is going to be high. What we are really looking at is anything which is more than 1,000 of ferritin acute phase reaction tells you, yes, as Dr. Apurva rightly pointed out, yes, it's a marker of higher inflammation. So definitely more acute phase reactions are being released. So I think whatever be the inflammatory markers, whether you want to use a myriad group of it and use one alone, so it is good. So we are not repeating ferritin and IL-6. We just have a baseline and then we follow trend CRP in our institute. That's what I've been doing and my colleagues have been doing. And I think it works both ways. So I think clinical deterioration when somebody is going down with the elevated CRP and no obvious evidence of secondary infection tells us that it's worsening inflammation.
Okay, so coming back to one of the statements you made that you are using baricitinib whenever you are trying to spare the steroids or the steroids are difficult to give, or you are using it with a lower dose of steroids. So what would be the rationale behind it, and why not you use both together in the full dosage?
And that's because very simple. The study was done when the DEXA study was not done. So dexamethasone was not a standard of care in the main study for baricitinib was being carried on. So I think the data is that remdesivir plus baricitinib and plain remdesivir alone was what they were studying at that time, and the data is extrapolated. So that's what I'm saying. So if you don't have TOSI available, then I think it's fair enough to combine. I don't think it's just that the initial study from which
can it be a logical combination of remdesivir, baricitinib, and steroid in a moderate to severe patient?
Absolutely. It can. It is what we generally tend to do. That's why I'm saying we would probably not. So we would just use a DEXA 8 rather than a DEXA ARDS 24 milligram kind of a dose and use baricitinib plus remdesivir in a patient moderate to severe illness in the 7 to 10 days.
So what are your anticipated adverse effects that you are worried of using baricitinib?
Baricitinib makes you sure that you better get your anticoagulation to therapeutic level. So irrespective of what your D-dimer is, you better get your Clexane or whatever you're using to a full therapeutic dose, or at least an intermediate dose for most of the time for 14 days when they are there.
So that is a big cautionary note.
So there is those are the things that I'm.
So that is a big cautionary note to our viewers.
Procoagulant side effect is what I'm.
Yes. So now you have two procoagulant situation. One, the disease itself, as well as the use of the baricitinib. So it's better to ramp up your anticoagulation. So any thrombotic side effects, Dr. Prashant Behera, you have encountered while you are using tofacitinib? as of now?
No, sir. No, sir, not till no side effects there. Like 1 or 2 cases myelosuppression, sir, I have seen. 2 cases of
Okay.
myelosuppression with low TLC.
But that could be the viral induced, the virus induced itself, the disease process itself, or a macrophage activation syndrome. Other than the sometimes it is very difficult to differentiate also. Okay, coming back to the multimodal aspect of it. So now that we can think of combining antivirals with the JAK-STAT inhibitors, with the general immunosuppressants like steroids, or if in JAK-STAT inhibitors you are not using, you can use an interleukin-6 receptor blockers. Do you think there is a role of thymosin alpha, which improves the lymphopenia in certain way for some of the patients? I will ask Dr. Rakesh Periwal because he started this question.
My only knowledge is it's a peptide. That's it. And it can be used in liver disease and kidney disease. But I'd like to hear from someone who has used it for COVID or other reasons, and anything to support the use of this drug.
I have used it in quite a few patients, kind of more than 1,000 patients. So I don't know. I don't really. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you are audible.
Dr. Kaur, you are on mute. Dr. Kaur, you are on mute.
We are on mute.
Sorry. This is very difficult at times. Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So thymosin alpha is actually normally generally prepared by the produced by the thymus gland, which enhances the cell-mediated immunity, and it has got a key role in nurturing the T cells, right? And what it does is that if you see, what is happening? Sorry. So the mechanism action is it's got a dual mechanism, right? It stimulates the stem cells and increases the production of both CD4, CD8, but most importantly, it increases the natural killer cells. So if you go into the detail of the pathophysiology of COVID, that there is a huge depression in the natural killer cells and the CD4 and CD8 lymphocytes. So it tends to increase that, and also a little lesser expression of the dendritic cells, which are also pro-inflammatory. And it increases the class 1, MHC class 1 expression, and with some unknown reasons, it has got a milder effect on the viral replication also. But most importantly, it acts through the T cell apoptosis and increases a little bit of the lymphocyte count. So it has got a milder and a different way of acting, bypassing the JAK-STAT pathways and others. So I think it could be a little bit of additional pathway or an additional appendage to our overall immunomodulation mechanism or the immunomodulation strategy. And Dr. Prashant, are you back?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I have used it in combining both the waves. I've used it more than 1,000 patients. So patients were doing well, most of the patients. And for a brief period of time, the supply was irregular. And the mortality in my hospital increased. I don't know whether it is related to this or not. So that is the only thing which I can say that made me feel ki, immunosin alpha or thymosin for that matter makes a difference to patient's outcome. But I don't have any data or anything to relate with it directly. But I feel ki it can be. It appears to be a harmless drug also. Other than the cost is little too much if you give a full dose to a patient. Apart from that, I think it makes sense to give for a week or so in sick patients.
Dr. Suresh, what would be your experience?
Actually, no experience. I've stayed away from it again. I said to promote natural killer cells, to promote just the
CD4 and CD8, yeah, lymphocytes. Yeah.
So maybe a good idea, may not be a good idea. So it is kind of sitting on the fence where you really don't know how to react to it. If you say that your inflammation is good for you to apoptize the whole entire viral infection, preventing the release of the various cytokines. And this is a theoretical model. This should work, but again, since there is not much of data, at least the other drugs, though expensive, have some form of both clinical evidence and in this situation. So I'm not very sure. The data is very robust, but as I said, any kind of immunomodulation is welcome. It's a different mechanism, as you rightly pointed out. It doesn't go through the JAK-STAT pathway. So maybe as a person, I haven't looked at in the numbers or.
Fair enough. Anyone wants to add regarding your thymosin alpha? Dr. Shayan, Dr. Rakesh, Dr. Shayan, please first.
Yeah, I have been using this immunosin alpha for quite some time, but unfortunately, I didn't get the desired result. We have been using this in moderate patients, but no, unfortunately, my suggestion is it doesn't work.
So actually, maybe it's time that we can have a very well-designed, at least some data we can collect. If it may not be a randomized controlled trial, because our research setup in the way we practice, particularly in the private setup, and with a huge work pressure, sometimes it is impossible to keep up the structured data or conduct a proper trial. So I think if sometimes an industry support or some sort of support from the government sector extended towards the private partners also, we should conduct a proper your research or a trial to get to know the actual results, because here we can find a little conflicting between where with Prashant Kumar, Dr. Prashant Kumar said that he has experience of over thousands and he is quite confident about it, and wherein Dr. Shayan Gupta is saying that it may not work. But there are so many of complex interactions of multiple pharmaceutical agents, right, working towards. It is really very difficult to comment whether it works or whether it won't. So as of now, principally, it should be not that bad. But as they said that it could be a double-edged situation, right? But principally, it should not be very harmful. It should be rather helpful, but we need a lot of proper evidences to know whether it works or not. Suresh, what would be your take about interferon?
So I think the interferons again has to be, again, one of the things is that a combination of interferon, like in hepatitis C, you combine thymosin alpha with interferon. So I think a combination of these kind of things are, again, needs to be studied. So the data for these things is still lacking as compared to the other immunomodulators. That's what my take on this is. Again, as I said, if you are just one pathway,
maybe we should wait for a while.
Maybe it is better that whether it's a cocktail of these two or just interferon, it's just too early to say.
Yeah, as you are telling that this is how the interference works in the pathogenesis and in a mild to moderate COVID, where you have good efficient interferon-1 production and activity, which aids in viral clearance and resolution of the disease with a regulated inflammatory response. But in an exacerbated inflammatory response with the so-called misnomer cytokine storm, you have an impaired interferon-1 production and activity itself, and where it goes to a persistence of the viral replication and stimulating the exacerbated a pro-inflammatory system, which eventually leads to a severe disease. So as you see that there are pegylated interferon. In fact, we are conducting a trial here in Reliance in Mumbai, and we have almost enrolled more than 20 patients, and we have not done the interim analysis, but as of now it shows a little equivocal, more towards a better beneficial. So we are doing this one, we are doing on a tofacitinib, we are doing one of the largest trials on antibody cocktail therapy, and a very new novel gas therapy, which is getting a patient's much quicker resolution from and negativity. So I cannot name it because of some sort of confidentiality agreement, but that is going to be a major game changer for mild to moderate symptomatic patients. So these are the 4-5 trials we are doing, including the pegylated interferon alpha B2B. But as Dr. Suresh said, that there could be a combination of interferons as well as multiple interferons along with thymosin alpha, compared to that or that which has worked wonders in hepatitis C. Maybe if we have enough data and good support on a clinical trial, we can have a conclusive documentation that the interferons can work in COVID itself, but provided we have a good data, right, Dr. Suresh? Provided we get a good trial, sort of thing. Okay, so I would, it's more than past at 8. So I will come back one by one to all the panelists and take your call on the practical and probable aspect of using immunomodulators in moderate to severe COVID. I will start with
any comments on bevacizumab? Anyone?
Yeah, Prashant, yeah, bevacizumab.
Anyone?
Yeah,
because I've not used it.
I think being a vascular endothelial growth factor 1 inhibitor, we've used it when we are completely short of TOSI. Doesn't seem to work as well as baricitinib or tocilizumab, to be honest with you. But again, just inhibiting the endothelial part of the, as I think that one slide which Arindam showed with that 4 horses, I think that is what is there. So if you have to that's why steroids work well, because it is going to be a general immunosuppression. And then if you're going to suppress only the endothelial growth factors and trying to stop the leaky capillaries, maybe in ARDS, it might be able to, once you're already in ARDS, you're done and dusted. So maybe in an early ARDS, you're still on HFNO, maybe there's some role of that thing. But I think, again, that subset, particular subset where Bevaci might work better than anything else is not defined as of now.
If I may answer to you, is that there is a possibility, because now we are dealing with 2 different pathways. One is your interleukin, JAK-STAT and SOX pathway, right? And then the other pathway is regarding the endothelium, which is the VGF, the other endothelial factors, von Willebrand, then your the plasminogen activators, connecting the platelets to the endothelium, this PA1 factors and all others. So there is a new subset of monoclonal antibody which are targeting this therapeutic areas, right? Particularly this VGF. There are other targets also. So one person from Mumbai, one of the very renowned Abhay Bhave of hemato-immunologist, he is working on a very large project funded by the government of India, where he are trying to combine a sort of this one what we are calling as the coagulation cascade monoclonal antibodies along with your general monoclonal antibodies. So that would be a little risky because we do not know the repercussion of it, but maybe in future we might have a separate combination of monoclonal antibodies towards it. But my take would be that Do not use as it a rescue agent or a substitution agent that you are not being able to find it. Know what you are using, know the proper implication as well as how it works. Otherwise, please, these are very dangerous weapons. Please do not use it. Have the manual of the weapon, understand the process, understand how it works, and then only use it. Okay, so Dr. Prashant, you can start with the concluding note, and then we will go one by one.
Yes, we are seeing lots of patients who are requiring immunomodulation at any stage, but I'm yet to see a better drug than a steroid after treating kind of 1,000 patients in each wave so far. Other drugs, I don't know, like we are still to be really convinced about something. Steroids, everywhere it's mentioned in right doses and right time. I don't know what is the right dose and what is the right time. So, but then it really works. People have really survived. People have really improved drastically after giving it. So I would say ki use steroids in a manner which which we feel ki it will help the patient. Other drugs, other immunomodulators, I'm yet to see. Thymosin alpha looks like one harmless drug, which for whatever benefit we can give. Apart from that, it costs patients a little too much for a 7 days course. And rest of the drugs, I don't know. Like I would like to hear from other panelists.
Okay, Prashant Behra, concluding remarks.
When patient is running high-grade fever and sudden worsening of hypoxemia and with high CRP and high IL-6, in that case, I will prefer use tocilizumab, looking at the risk of secondary bacterial infection and fungal infection. And about thymosin alpha and uristatin, I am using almost in each and every case. If patient is in severe disease and is requiring very high oxygen, patient is on NIV or patient is on mechanical ventilation. And about baricitinib, I am using when patient did not respond. Sometimes along with steroid, I'm using baricitinib and preferably tofacitinib over baricitinib. As last one of the studies shows some whether it can be used with steroid or not properly, we don't know. That's why I am preferring preferably using tofacitinib over baricitinib in this type of cases.
Very good. Well, Rakesh.
Yeah, using steroids as usual. I don't know if CRP should guide us to use steroids earlier as well. I don't know if there is fever persistent, CRP is elevated and patient is still not desaturating. Should we use at that point of time? Well, there might be benefit there. We have used it in very few patients. And the other thing is, why not use these drugs for a day or two and see the response and go away? Baricitinib, because it costs $420 for those 12 tablets, seems very, very attractive. I don't know if the 420 is the right mark on it, but why can't we use it for 3-4 days and go away with it? I mean, what is the sacrosanct duration of 2 weeks that we use baricitinib if the patient improves? That was one thing I wanted to ask. And regarding the duration of steroids also, we have used it longer than 10 days. So I think if we follow clinical trials, our mortality will also be equivalent to clinical trials. So we will have as many dead patients to learn. Maybe we are using a little bit of higher steroids day 1, day 2, and a little bit longer till CRP normalizes. I don't know if that's the right way to do it. Or till the patients are not off hypoxia, maybe a little bit. Sometimes it takes around 15-20 days also. And we are not using antibacterials at all. So that's like zero, not at all. And interestingly, COVID patients die of refractory hypoxia, something that we haven't seen in any RDS. They don't develop renal failure. They don't develop going to go shock. Nothing happens to them. Continuously, they are hypoxic day in and day out. I think it's a very pure disease to intervene. And regarding thymosin, I don't know, but the only attractive thing, it looks like it could be used in CKD, CLD, all these patients who don't have any other agent to use. Tocilizumab we have used. It's fairly expensive. It was not available, as Apurva said, but now it's available for being used very sparingly, not that many patients. And other drugs we have not used at all. So I don't know what is the right way to go about But yeah, what we have seen is that patients deteriorate very, very fast. And the outcomes on ventilated patients was very, very bad because most of them had very, very stiff lungs. I don't know what determinants of outcomes are. And the more interesting thing was patients who are hypoxic and not very dyspneic. I think there also we change our mind of what we are going to use. So when the patient looks visibly in a lot of distress, we tend to use these immunomodulators. But when they are hypoxic, requiring high oxygen and not very dyspneic, we tend to change our mind. And if CRP is on a
So
declining
you are
trend
telling
with a
that we are
steroid of
biased when we have. You are telling we
yes,
are
yes, why not?
biased when
By the
we
looks,
see an
yeah.
happy hypoxia
And we,
patient.
I think we should be. Why not? That is a clinical
Fair
judgment.
enough.
If
Okay.
the patient is
Thanks,
not tachypneic,
thanks for your
not tachycardic.
lovely comments and Dr. Sayan.
Yeah, my take is there's no alternative to the steroids. Steroids are the main pillars of the COVID treatment, what we have encountered. And as regards this immunosin alpha or ulonistatin or tocilizumab, we have been using these three molecules for quite some time. And if we actually use this tocilizumab within an optimum time, if there is actually the patient is worsening, and within 24 to 48 hours, if we actually start with this therapy, that is tocilizumab, what we have found out, many of our patients, they do responded well, but it needs a lot of, as you have already mentioned, it needs a lot more cases to be studied as regards this immunosin alpha or ulonistatin, whether these work or not, and whether there is any other drug interactions, or what is the optimum time of using these molecules. My vote would be steroids. And if the patient starts worsening, they tocilizumab. We do not have any other molecule in our hand. So that's my take.
Okay, that would be a nice statement. Apurva has to leave because of certain pre-approved appointments. So I will ask Dr. Suresh to give his closing remarks, and then we will conclude the session. Yes,
another question was take on high first dose of steroids. First dose of steroid.
First dose of steroid.
First dose of steroid in cytokine storm. Yes.
Okay. So I would request Suresh to conclude, including this point of the pulse steroid therapy.
So I think so. In the I think let's divide it into phases of illness. So I think first week of illness, high risk patients get monoclonal antibodies, interferons, hymosin alpha to prevent progression to severe disease is a work in progress, and Arindam, as he rightly said, is doing trials to find out whether it's happening. In the second week of illness, when you are in distress, you're admitted, your oxygen levels are low, you need to start steroids, and the trial dexamethasone or any steroid equivalent to the same dose. You don't need to go into a high dose at this particular point in time. And within 24 to 48 hours of starting dexamethasone or any steroid of your choice, if things are not getting better, then I think an immunomodulator agent needs to be thought of. The candidate drugs which are available, which are easily available, would be tocilizumab and baricitinib. I think so. The evidence so far and the experience so far has been maximum for most of us in the entire world has been with tocilizumab. The experience with other immunomodulators, baricitinib is also there in the world, and most of us are getting. Other drugs, especially bevacizumab and other monoclonal antibodies which target the endothelium, the thrombosis is not very clear. Once you are in that phase, so other than this, so if you miss that bus, then probably there's no point in doing once they're already on a ventilator and it's more than 3-4 days of ventilation, you don't have anything. I think it's just bare necessary critical care with preventing infections and doing the best Canada's care with duty prophylaxis and so on, as in the prevent using least amount of antibiotic would be okay. The last question would be in the third week of illness, if you are still not getting better and oxidation is the only problem, and if your CT scan, if you're able to get the patient down for a CT scan, and if you have an organizing pneumonia-like picture, that means you still have consolidation, which is arcuate, which is peripheral, and which is free of infections, then maybe a pulse dose steroid may be thought of. But I would say if most of us intensivists who are not in a pulmonary background should take the help of a pulmonologist to decide, and a radiologist who's experienced in reading it, to say whether it's an organizing pneumonia like picture or is it just a lot of fibrosis coming in, and in those situations it's not. So I would divide this into phases.
Suresh, I was tempted to ask you a question. Is that in your organizing pneumonia, right? You had been using, as a pulmonologist, you have had used steroids in a higher dose and for a longer period. Do you think there are certain subset of patients in COVID who can benefit out of the same strategy, a higher dose and a longer period?
Yes. Yes. So I think there's no doubt about that. But this is a strategy because there are very good, there are one series of autopsy which has shown 6 patients with AFOP, that is acute fibrinous organizing pneumonia as a cause of death, which is different from diffuse alveolar damage. So the idea is very simple. When your fibroblasts proliferate, and where they proliferate, did they proliferate inside the alveolar capillary membrane, all the 3 layers of the alveolar capillary membrane, or they only form fibrin plugs inside the alveoli and the alveolar ducts? So that is the only difference. Otherwise, there's no difference in the pathophysiology of an organizing pneumonia, and viruses are very common. So this pathophysiology is a histologic finding, we cannot do it. But radiologically, if you have a good radiologist who can identify CT features, there are certain subtle features of organizing pneumonia which can be deciphered. But in our country, the Acinetobacter in the Klebsiella will also look like that. So you have to be very careful about this. So if
and take a help of a proper, and
Yes.
obviously, if you are a physician or a critical care person, please do take help of a experienced pulmonologist and radiologist in certain situations. Right. So you have to take that part also. So I would thank all the panelists for being here, and to quick summarize, we have learned a lot about the steroids dose, duration, timing, about cytokine storm being a rather misnomer. So we should look into holistically the entire thing. There are a lot of immunomodulators which are being used, which are also coming. So please have a detailed knowledge about it before using it. And there is a possibility that the combination of or a multimodal approach of immunomodulators can be helpful, provided you know about the details of it and there are sufficient evidences backing it up. We can use at certain segments the interferons, particularly in the early stage, and thymosin alpha. As of now, it could be helpful, not very harmful agent, but we need a structured trial to prove its efficacy. But most importantly, we will learn. We will read and more, and again come back to discuss it, and hope we stay safe, and we can, with our proper strategy of vaccination, COVID appropriate behavior, and more testing and restraining ourselves, we may evade the upcoming waves. So thank you all for coming, for being here. Thank you, Alish, for supporting the program, and thank you, HCP Forum, for organizing it. And lastly, and most importantly, thank you all the panelists and Dr. Suresh particularly to provide us your valuable time. Thank you. Goodbye, and we'll meet soon.
Thank you.